Hey, let me get right into this. We're in a unique season. I can't really explain it spiritually or theologically, but for some reason, always the fall is always just a strong season of just great things happening in the local church, not just ours, but all over. I sort of correlates with the natural fall harvest. Where fall is a harvest season, and the same thing happens at our church. We're seeing an incredible amount of salvations every single service, every single week. We just came out of a great month of men's conferences and women's conferences. Man, we had just a powerful healing night on Wednesday night. If you were here for that, God just showed up strong, and all sorts of people received instant miracles in their bodies, and it's just a great season to be in. And one of my jobs as a pastor is I'm not just a pastor, but I'm a shepherd. And a shepherd, one of their jobs is to move sheep from pasture to pasture. I read someone said it like this: more than a shepherd, you're like a rancher, and that's where you move people. And my job is to always move you one step closer to God. And when I put this series on our calendar, I really wasn't as strategic as I'm looking like I am right now, to be honest with you. But it just seems like this is such a strategic series for the season that we're in as a church. And what we're talking about is cut the noise. Here it is: how to hear His voice. How to hear the voice of God. And here's our theme verse in Proverbs chapter 3. It says, listen for God's voice in everything you do. Like God wants to speak to you, and here's the reason why. Everywhere you go, He's the one who will keep you on track. How many just want to stay on the right track? And here's the deal. God said if you listen to His voice, He'll keep you on track. When it comes to critical life decisions like what school you're going to go to, or who you're going to marry, or whether you should take a job or not, business owners, whether you should do this deal, don't do that deal, whether you should hire this person, not hire that person. Here's the thing: if you listen to God's voice in everything you do, He'll keep you on track. And so, if we could hear God, and if God could speak to us, then we'd probably stay on track for our lives. And oftentimes, when we're off track, maybe we weren't listening to God's voice. And so critical life-altering decisions. Here's the New Testament counterpart for this verse. John chapter 10, it says, the gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice, and they come to him. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, here it is, he walks ahead of them. How many know, your God walks ahead of you? He knows where you're going, and just by chance, if He knew where you were going, He would know the traps that were set for you. He would know the doors that should be opening for you, that maybe He could speak to you. It says, and they follow Him because they know His voice. Now, here's a timeout moment, because the world today has mocked anyone who said, God spoke to me. Who are you to think God could speak to you? Do you actually think God's a speaking God? Well, here's the truth. Old Testament, New Testament, it says that you can know His voice. It said they won't follow a stranger. They will run from Him because they don't know His voice. And so what we're talking about in this series is to hear the voice of God, we have to turn down the volume of the world. That's why we're talking about cut the noise out. There's so many voices and so many people are trying to grab your attention. And this series is written with the idea that if you could hear God's voice, He'd keep you on track. If you could hear the voice of God, He'd walk out ahead of you and help you. Now, I don't know if you know anybody that's hard of hearing in your sphere of influence or in your family, but if you know someone who's hard of hearing, and especially men, it's like your wife says, you're hard of hearing, you say, huh, what? And, but if you know someone hard of hearing, here's what they do. If you watch television with them, they will put that television up to volume 100. Almost misery. And you're like, hey, turn it down. They go, I can't hear you. So you're hard of hearing. They go, especially men go, no, I'm not. So we were watching football in our house yesterday, and we've got all the kids and actually neighbor kids and their friends, and they don't even knock. They just come in and they go right to the fridge and eat what they want, and they're there and they're cooking. Some are having breakfast and some are having lunch at the same time, and I'm trying to watch football, and I'm watching football, and I don't care about commotion. It doesn't bother me, because you know why? I got a remote. And I just turn that remote up, and I don't make all the commotion you want, because I can drain you out. And so finally, Dina's like, hey, that TV's too loud. So I had to turn it down. I said, okay, everybody, get out of here. Because I had to cut the noise so I could hear. And so many of us, you know people who are hard of hearing, and instead of addressing the hearing, what they do is they try to turn up the volume. And I want to take you to an Old Testament story. And if you've read the Old Testament, you would know this story. It's kind of a famous story from the Old Testament, and it's about the prophet Samuel, but this time he's just a boy. He's 12 years old, and here's sort of how his story begins. In 1 Samuel chapter 3 and verse 1, it says, meanwhile, the boy Samuel served the Lord by assisting Eli. Now, in those days, messages from the Lord were very rare, and visions were quite uncommon. Like, I don't want to go into the details of that, but it's because some leadership issues is why that was. So one night, Eli, who was almost blind by now, had gone to bed. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God. We're going to come back to this verse. Suddenly, the Lord called out, Samuel. Yes, Samuel replied, what is it? He got up and ran to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? I didn't call you, Eli replied. In every parent's famous words about 9 o'clock at night, go back to bed. You aren't thirsty. Your stomach doesn't hurt. Come on, you're just trying to stay up. Go back to bed. So he did. Then the Lord called out again, Samuel. And again, Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? I didn't call you, my son. Eli said, go back to bed. Samuel did not yet know the Lord because he had never, and when I put this together, I thought about this, and my heart was stirred with this thought, because maybe there are people here, maybe there are people watching online, maybe there are those of you who had heard from God, but right now you have never had a message from the Lord before, and you're wondering, does God speak? If he does speak, why am I not hearing? Is there really the voice of God? Or is that just a pipe dream for me? Maybe there are people here that are facing critical life decisions that so desperately need a message from the Lord. So the Lord called a third time. And once more Samuel got up and went to Eli. Here I am. Did you call me? Then Eli realized it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So he said to Samuel, go and lie down again. And if someone calls again, say, and this is the title for today's message, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. So Samuel went back to bed, and the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, speak, your servant is listening. And I love how this story ends. And the Lord said to Samuel, I am about to do something. And what I'm trying to get across to you is if we could get to a posture or a position where we said, speak, Lord, your servant is listening, I am convinced he would do the same thing for you. I am about to do something in your life. And I'm telling you, God wants to speak to your life. And in this story, I just kind of jotted down some thoughts to myself about those 10 verses. And today's message, can I just be honest with you? I'm just going to outline this chapter, and I'm just taking these 11 verses, and I'm just going to break apart 4 thoughts from them about how to hear the voice of God. Because God is listening, or God is speaking, but are we listening? God is talking, but are we in the posture that Samuel's in? Speak, Lord, your servant is listening. I thought about this when I read this, that he was talking to a 12-year-old boy. I thought that was interesting. I thought this was interesting, that God did not give up on speaking to him. I mean, God spoke to him, it took him 4 times to get to him. And I think a lot of us are here today thinking, man, I've never heard the voice of God. Is God speaking? And is he giving up on me? And I'm going to, he's not giving up on you. I thought interesting to note that Samuel was near the ark. Interesting. And I thought Eli was interesting what he said. He said, I'm not speaking, but God is. And how many of us are looking to the world or looking to people in our lives for wisdom? There's nothing's wrong with that. I think that's good. But maybe God wants to speak to you. And there's a pattern in this story that I think we can all learn from. And I want to start off by saying, think about it. God didn't speak to Eli. He was speaking to Samuel. He didn't speak to the aged, seasoned prophet. He spoke to the 12-year-old boy. Because I think we got to confront something about hearing the voice of God. And here it is, that God does not just speak to the spiritually elite. I think a lot of us think that that's all God speaks to is to the spiritually elite. And why is this important? Because maybe you're here and you said, I've made a mistake, like I've sinned, and maybe I didn't read my Bible this week, or maybe I didn't serve like I should have, or maybe I misspoke, and maybe I got angry with my kids or my spouse, and you're thinking, I'm not qualified to hear from God. And I got some great news for you, everybody, that God doesn't just speak to the spiritually elite, He speaks to anybody that will listen. He speaks, here it is, guys, He speaks to regular people. He speaks to people like you, people like me. And you go through and you read that story and about Samuel, he's just a boy. And I always think about Peter, and he's my favorite character in the New Testament. Here's the reason why. It's because he messed up so many times and God never gave up on him. Does anyone qualify for that? Besides me, but even when Peter first started, if you read his story, he first started with Jesus. Jesus came and met with him, and he said, Peter, I want to use your boat. And Peter said, okay, Lord. And when he got done, he said, hey, why don't you let your nets down for a catch? And Peter said, hey, Jesus, listen, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a fisherman. You're a preacher. You stick to preaching. I'll stick to fishing. And he's okay. Nevertheless, Lord, at your word, I'll let down the net. And he got so many fish, his nets began to break. Well, then you go further along in his story, Peter had all kinds of situations where Jesus would talk to him. Like he said one time, he said, hey, Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny him. He goes, not so, Lord, not true. Jesus had a conversation with him once. He said, Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. And then about a minute later in the same conversation, he goes, Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. Same conversation. Peter, if you love me, feed my sheep. To which Peter's like, hey, Jesus, I get it. To which Jesus is like, hey, Peter, I know you. I got to say it 3 times for you to get it once. Later on in life, you'd think Peter's doing really good. Later on in life, he had this vision. It's in Acts. He had this vision, and from the Lord started speaking to him, and up in this vision, there's all kinds of animals up there, and the Lord spoke to him and said, Peter, you can kill and eat, which lets you know God's not a vegetarian, everybody. And so anyways, and then Peter says this, not so, Lord, I'm not going to do it. I mean, this is Peter. And sometimes we think that if we're not perfect, that God's going to quit speaking to us. And I want you to hear me, that God, He doesn't just speak to the spiritually elite. He'll speak to anybody. I'll tell you a story of myself. I travel probably more than I really want to most of the time. And at this season of my life, I like to help other churches and work with teams. But when I do travel, because I don't want to be gone from Dina and the kids or be gone from you, really. And so when I do, I usually try to leave early in the morning and work the same day. So I don't usually use travel days. My travel day is I work that same day. And when I'm done, like I'll leave on the latest flight out and try to get home as soon as I can. And so usually there's short 2-day trips and 3-day trips. And so at any rate, but when I get on an airplane, like here's the deal. If I get on an airplane, and if you've noticed today, if you fly a lot, it seems like every airplane, every seat is always taken. It's not like a decade ago where there was empty. You could almost kind of pray and use your faith to say, okay, Lord, let me have an empty seat beside me. It doesn't work anymore. And so every seat's taken. Well, listen, and for me, I'm a pastor, and here's what happens to me. Whenever someone sits down, they exchange pleasantries, and so I pray, Lord, please have no one sit beside me, Lord. Please have no one sit beside me. And that prayer's not working anymore. Someone's always sitting beside me. And so when they sit beside me, here's what happens. They say, hi, how are you? What do you do? And I'm always confronted with this issue. Do I lie or tell the truth? And so, can I tell you, here we go. Confession is good for the soul, bad for the reputation. Here, sometimes I've even told white lies and said, well, I'm a teacher, which is kind of true. And here's the reason, because if I say I'm a pastor, they hear one or two things. If I say I'm a pastor, this is what they hear. They hear, but he's either a leader of a cult or he's Dr. Phil. And so when I'm on a plane, you don't understand. I don't get quiet time in my life. My days start with stuff going on, they end with stuff going on. And so I don't want to be Dr. Phil sometimes on the airplane. And so here's a new thing that's worked for me lately. My kids got me these AirPod things. I don't really know how to use them, to be honest with you. I can't figure out the volume on them. But what I did find out is this. If you put them in your ears, even if they're not on, people don't talk to you. And so it used to be back in the old days, I would kind of fake sleep. Kind of one eye open and look. But now I put these AirPods on. And I don't even have them connected half the time. I don't know how to do it. And so I'm on this plane recently, and I'm towards the back, and this little single mom gets on with 3 little kids. And they're all on there, and so all of a sudden, I got my AirPods in. I'm not listening to anything, they're just in. And all of a sudden, the Lord starts speaking to me. Now let me kind of set the stage for you why this is important. Is because every morning when I pray, and when I pray with the kids, we always end our prayers this way. Every morning, Lord, our life belongs to you. Use our life today to be a blessing to somebody. Bring us across the path of someone closest to eternity and use us. So we pray that prayer every day. How many know, maybe it's just me, sometimes you pray prayers you really don't mean. And so God does speak to me to bless people, and sometimes I say, well, that's not the one I want to bless today, Lord. That's not the one that's convenient for me today. Because I know you all do this. And so, sure enough, there's these 3 little kids there and this single mom, and the Lord starts speaking to me about helping, and I'm like, but Lord, please, I'm going home to kids. I just left kids. I just work with a church staff full of a bunch of punk kids. Lord, let me. And this is the truth. And so I'm ignored. AirPods in, nothing going through them. I love to read, and I love something. And all of a sudden, one of those little babies just jumped off her mom's lap and crawls in my lap. I said, that's not fair, Lord. You know what I mean, right? And so then the Lord starts talking to me about how this single mom, and they're asking for snacks, and the Lord just kind of, he goes, buy them dinner. I said, on the airplane, Lord? I said, I don't even let my own kids buy food on the airplane. You better pack something if you want to eat something on the airplane. I always try to take one of the kids with me on the trip. One of my first trips over, one of my little ones came on, because I fly a lot. Sometimes they'll upgrade you for free. And so we sat in first class, which is kind of unusual for us. And so my little Julia sitting on first class, her first trip, and she's just thinking, this is the way to go, man. They're bringing hot towels and food and all this sort of nuts. You want an ice cream sundae, hot fudge on it in the middle of the air, And so on the way home, we go back to the back of the plane. She says, where's my hot fudge sundae, Daddy? That's not the way it goes, babe. And so I'm sitting there, and so we had to buy him. I had to buy him snacks and all that. And at the end, I got to pray. I don't know what happened to him. But here's the point that I'm trying to get across to you. Sometimes God speaks, but we think because we've missed it and we don't always answer that he quits talking to us. We try to reason it away. I had a friend that was at a meeting once, and the Lord spoke to him, and he said, I want you to give this person a $100 bill. And my friend was just young in ministry, and he said, I have one hid. God says, yeah, use it and give it. He says, but God, that person that you want me to give it to is very, very wealthy. I'd be embarrassed to give that to them. They're going to think it's not a benevolent case. And they struggle with it. 3 days, the Lord wouldn't quit talking to him like Samuel over and over and over again. Finally, he did. He walked up, pulled the $100 bill out of his pocket, his wallet rather, walked up to the man and said, sir, I know you're a business owner. This guy's a multi businesses in multiple nations of the world, and 3 continents, and he gave it to him and said, sir, I think God spoke to me. And I'm so embarrassed, and the man stopped and said, thank you. Tears started pouring down his eyes. He said, what you don't know is, a friend of mine, a young man in ministry, he said, what you don't know is this. This is like 30 years ago. He said, what you don't know is this. I talked to God 3 days ago, and I said, God, I've been giving And I like to give and I want to give. But I got to know if this stuff is true about sowing. All I ever do is give, and I don't ever reap anything. He said, I just would like someone to walk up and give me a $100 bill. And he walked up, and sometimes you don't know one word from God that if we'll listen to can actually make a difference in someone's life. Here's the verse. And the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, speak, your servant is listening. In the next 18, 19 minutes I have with you, I want to hammer in on this phrase, your servant is listening. What do I have to do to position myself to listen to the voice of God? If you're taking notes, write it down. Number one, and I think this is one we miss a lot, humility. I need his voice. We talk about humility in the church, and it's become such a religious word. It's such a word that has become we almost define it as I'm worthless, I have no value, I have no meaning. My life is basically, I'm just living life on this earth with no plan, no assignment. And can I just tell you something? The word humility, none of those definitions fits the biblical, maybe the religious word, but not the biblical word. Because listen, humility is not I am worthless, because listen, you're a child of God. You're a son of God. You're a daughter of God. You've been bought. You've been engrafted into the family of God by the blood of Jesus. Come on, your past is redeemed. Your future makes sense. Come on, you're valuable. You're kings and priests. It doesn't mean you're worthless. Humility, I like to say it like this. If you want to become yesterday's man, yesterday's woman, then get pride in your heart. Here's what the Bible word for humility means. Humility is I'm dependent on God. I need God. I'm not really all that much on my own, but I need a lot of God in my life. In fact, you could almost say it like this. Humility is the key to having spiritual ears. Humility is the way that you hear from God. Here's what he said in James chapter 4 and verse 8. God resists you when you are proud. God, if you don't think this is true, go back and read the story of King Saul and David. Saul was God's man. He was the one that stood. He had stature and he had strength and he had favor upon his life. And he was the one that was going to lead, but it got to a point in his life where he said, God, I don't need you anymore. And here's a ruddy, small, little shepherd boy that was on the backside of the desert said, God, I need you in my life. And he said, God resists you when you're proud, but he continually pours out grace when you are humble. When you say, God, I need you. Here's Romans 12 in the Passion Translation says, God has given me a grace to speak a warning about pride. He said, here's a warning. I would ask each of you to be emptied of self-promotion and not create a false image of your importance. Notice this. It's a warning about pride. A dependence on self. And you think about it. Why would God skip the seasoned minister, Eli? If you study the backstory there, you'll find that Eli had kind of gotten things out of order and he was no longer dependent upon God. And God chose a 12-year-old young man to speak to. I think here's the lesson. We got to be young in our serve to God. We got to be like on fire in our serve to God. Remember what it was like when you first got saved? Remember what it was like when you first came into the family of God? Like, man, you couldn't wait to read your Bible. You couldn't wait to pray. You couldn't wait. You didn't give because you had to. You gave because you loved God. You didn't serve because you had to. You served because you loved God. You didn't go to church because it was an obligation or a duty. You loved to do all that. And all I'm saying to you, you want to be humble? Get back to your young and your serve to God. Get back, remember, I'm on fire for God. Not because I have to, not out of duty, but because I love him so much. This is why I'd always tell you, this is why Grow is so important. Here in the Oviedo location, and all of our locations, we have Grow every week. And today is happening right now during second service, Grow 1. And I'm curious, take 4 weeks and commit to going through Grow. And if you will do that at the end of those 4 weeks, we'll disciple you through that, but we'll also find a place where you can use your gifts and your talents to serve the Lord with your life, everybody. So we got to stay young. Here's 1 Samuel chapter 3, this is number 2. Samuel was sleeping in the tabernacle near the ark of God, tabernacle, the church, near the presence of God. Here's what I'm saying. We have to stay in the tabernacle. We have to stay close because God whispers sometimes. And we have to stay close. We have to stay near to him. What we do know is this: all relationships, good relationships, are built on good communication. So if your marriage or parenting, or if you're leading an organization, if you're building a team, there has to be a free flow of communication. And this is why, can I be honest with you? The majority of the time that God speaks to me, it's just me, maybe I know this, but it's when I'm reading my Bible. And I'm reading some words on a page, and God's taking me down my path for my life. And all of a sudden, those words on the page aren't speaking to me, but God is speaking to my heart. Daily communication with God is absolutely necessary to hear the voice of God. I wish you could see your New Testament in particular, that the Bible is not a book with a history of God. The Bible is not just a book with a bunch of commands and things to do, but the Bible is actually a love letter written from God to you. Wish you could see it that way. When Dean and I were engaged, we were getting married, and we met in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She's from Pennsylvania. I was from Florida, Daytona Beach area. And so we had met in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we dated for a while. Well, then we were getting married, and so she left Tulsa to go to Pennsylvania, where we were getting married about a month before I left. And she was going up there to kind of set the wedding up and all that sort of stuff, and get everything ready and with her mom. And so I was stuck back. So I was missing her. Well, one day I went to the mailbox, and it's kind of unusual for me back then, to even want to go to the mailbox. And so I went to the mailbox, and there was a card from Dina in that mailbox. And so I opened up the card, and she sort of just, I miss you, but she wrote some things in there. She says, Norm, I love you. I can't wait to marry you and serve you all the days of your, not really, she didn't say any of that, but I can't wait to give you 5 children. And so all these, but she wrote all these nice things. And I'll be honest with you, do you know what kept me during that month when I was missing her and I just couldn't wait to be with her? Every night I kept that card beside my bed, and every night I'd pick it up and I'd read that card multiple times. And what would it do? It would communicate something to me over and over again. Come on, guys, your Bible, your prayer time, it's the way to get close to the voice of God. Here's the third thing, is we have to be quick to respond to his voice. If you want to hear the voice of God, be quick to respond. The verse is this: and the Lord came and called as before, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel replied, this is when God spoke, speak, your servant is listening. You might be here and you say, come on, Pastor, I haven't heard the voice of God in a long time. To which I would go back and say, what's the last thing he asked you to do? What is the last thing that he actually spoke with you? And always hearing the voice of God always starts with written instructions. Like, what does he say to do in the Bible here? This is how it works. We hear and we obey. There's a famous author that's a marriage specialist. Maybe you've heard of him. His name's Gary Chapman. And he wrote this book called The 5 Love Languages. And sort of the concept of this book kind of works this way, everybody, is that when you get married, this is sort of one of the main things you do, is you try to meet the needs of your spouse. And so here's what Gary says, is don't try to change them, try to meet their needs. And so he's broken down to 5 major love languages, like there's words of affirmation, quality time, gifts, physical touch, this sort of thing. And so I went to Dean and I reread this book and I said, he said, you have 2. You have one major one and then a secondary one. I said, what's you? And she goes, I'm so sorry to tell you this, I'm all 5. And so, but here's the deal. When you find out what your spouse's love language is, really that's how you fill their tank up. If it's because yours like mine might not be quality time. Dean is quality time, so mine's not quality time. And so I want to view hers through mine. And I see all of you going, hitting each other. And so for her, like it's important. Monday mornings is an important morning for her, for me and her. Because we're going to have breakfast together and talk. And it communicates something to her. That she's of value to me. And so what is God's love language? Here's God's love language. Obedience is our love language to God. Like what did he ask you to do? What is he talking to you about? What is he speaking to you about? That is his love. See, when I obey, he talks more. When I ignore, he talks less. Here's you want to see kind of the end of that story of 1 Samuel 3? I'll give you the end of it. Here it is. And as Samuel grew up, the Lord was with him, and everything Samuel said proved to be reliable. And all Israel, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south, knew that Samuel, here it is, was confirmed as a prophet of the Lord. At the end, he heard the voice, he responded to the voice, and it brought confirmation. And that's sort of the process. We kind of want to just, can I be honest with you? I do that too. God speaks, we're like, nah, don't like that one. Speak again, Lord. I want door 3, not door 1. And sometimes he quits speaking because what's the last thing he said to do? Let me wrap it up with this thought. I have 7 minutes left with you. I don't want to use them. Is we have to value his voice. Place a value on his voice. If you haven't got the theme of the day, let me give it to you one more time. He said, speak, your servant is listening. We have to place a value. Above all else, Samuel said, God, I need you to speak to me. Speak, your servant is listening. Let me kind of give you the backstory to this. Before there was 1 Samuel 3, there's 1 Samuel 1. And in that, there's a mother to Samuel. Her name is Hannah. And Hannah's in the temple one day. Eli, now you see him in 1 Samuel 3, he's old. But in 1 Samuel 1, he's doing okay there. And he goes in the temple one day, and there's this woman. And she's on her knees, and she's crying out to God. And in fact, she's crying out to God so much that Eli thought she was drunk. Come on, when's the last time you prayed a prayer that someone thought you were drunk? Guys, that's called praying right there. It's an audacious, bold prayer. And he says, hey, woman, how dare you? He said, hey, what are you doing bringing wine into the temple? Right? And so she says, I want a son. I'm desperate. And I want to set something up for you. Because Eli said, you're going to have a son. She said, I commit right now. I'll bring him to the temple of the Lord. I'll bring him to church. She set the stage for Samuel, Hannah did, to have a great life. She did 2 things. She said, I'm going to pray for him. Moms and dads, I don't know. I know we get discouraged raising children, but I promise you this, your prayers will never leave your children's life. It'll chase them all the days of their life. Secondly, if you have young children, let me just kind of throw this in. I know this seems self-serving, but trust me, I don't say this as self-serving. In fact, honestly, we've got space problems right now with our children in youth ministry. I'm just telling you the truth. That gets just blowing up in there. But the truth is if I could give you some advice, commit to making church part of their everyday week. I promise you won't be sorry one day in their life. And I'm not trying to do that to build something up, but this is what Hannah did for Samuel. She prayed for her child. She brought him to the temple of the Lord. And here it is, because here's so important. God whispered to her. And what you need to know about God is not a screamer. He's a whisperer. Now, I have 5 kids. I have 4 that are screamers. I've got 1 who's a whisperer. And when you talk to her on the phone, half our conversations go like this. What, honey? Say it again. What? Speak up a little bit. In fact, when she was in college, I'd say, say it again. She'd go, Daddy, just call me when you're quiet somewhere and hang up. And because I missed her so much, I'd say, hey, wait, click. I'd say, I'll get quiet. And sometimes, that's the way it is with God. He's a whisperer, and we're wanting him to yell. God's not a screamer, everybody. In fact, I think next week, I'm going to do a message called the whispers of God. And so we're wanting to crank up the volume of God's voice, and God's telling us, no, turn down the volume of the world. Let me wrap up with a couple stories. 5, 6 years ago, we were in process of buying this facility that you're in right now. And what some of you know this, some of the story, this might be a new facet for you. And so we had made a contract on this building through the realtor and a group in, what some of you do know is a group in Dubai. 5 business leaders, some families had bought this building, and they were from Dubai, and they were selling it to us, and we'd come to an agreement, and so I had made the decision we're going to do it. It was millions of dollars, and it was a big deal for our church. I went and signed the contract, went to our church, went to our board, went to our trustees, went to our church, announced it. We were all rejoicing. Everything's happy, and we're getting all the work together, for the renovations and all that. And I'm coming home from work one day, and I get a phone call from the realtor. I'll tell you where I'm at, because I remember the day just like it happened yesterday. I'm in Publix on Redbug in Tuscaloosa in Winter Springs. Now, if you're with AT&T, one thing you know about being at Publix on Redbug in Tuscaloosa, you're not going to have any phone calls in there, except there's one section. I know this because I'm a pastor. It's in the wine section. I've been all over that store trying to talk to people, and you go in the corner of that store, you can actually get reception. And so it's our realtor. He says, it's really important to talk to you. So I go all the way over there. And you know how it is. You don't know how it is, but you're a pastor. You're like, I'm in a wine store walking up and down the aisles talking to him, and I'm just certain everyone from East Coast Believers Church is going to show up at Publix at the same time and, take some pictures and put it on social media, And so I'm there, and he's talking, and he brings devastating news to me. He said, Pastor, I got to talk to you about something. He goes, these guys over there, they're reneging. They want more. He says, I'm going to tell you something. I know these kind of people. He goes, don't you yield to them. If you yield from them, they'll never quit taking from you. We have to walk away from this contract. To which I said, well, wait. We can't do that. I've already announced it to our church. I talked to our board, talked to our trustees. And one of the things I do know is this: when you pastor, when you lead, the currency of pastoring is trust. And so for me, trust is really important, because if you don't trust me, I can't lead. And so my words I have to back up my words. It's just what I know. And all these thoughts are going through my head. What am I going to say to everybody? How am I going to go back and tell everybody what I said was done really isn't done? It was a big deal, and our church is all fired up. We had celebration service, all that. So I leave the wine section. I don't buy anything, go out to my car. I'm sitting in my truck. And I remember sitting there, and I says, God, I need to hear from you right now. I don't need to hear from a realtor. I don't need to hear from our board. I love our board. I don't need to hear from my trustees. I love our trustees. I don't want to hear from advisors. I love our advisors. God, there's a moment right now, because I have business people, brilliant business people in this church that help me, and man, they help me guide this church, and such smart people. But I said, God, I don't need their words right now. I need yours. I went to my truck, turned it on. And there comes a time in your life where you got to turn the radio off. There comes a time in your life where you got to turn the text off. Turn the phone off. You got to turn down the volume of the world. I said, God, I'm desperate for you to speak to me. God spoke something to me. And when he spoke this to me, it's a verse that it wasn't new to me, but all of a sudden it became like it was God just speaking to me, not anybody else. And this is what God said. He said, I'm not a man, so I don't lie. I'm not human, and I don't change my mind. Have I ever spoken and failed to act to you, Norm? Have I ever promised something to you, Norm, and not carried it through? God spoke that to me in that parking lot at Publix that day. And can I just tell you this? I went home Tina said, everything okay? I said, everything's great. She said, how's the building? Oh, it's going great. No problem at all. Oh, there's a little hiccup with the contract, but it'll be fine. I went from desperation to victory in a moment with a word from God. Sometimes we need a voice that it's going to be okay. I'll wrap it up with this story because I want to address something I think is the overarching thesis of this scripture we just read. As I've done the outline, here it is. Let me set this story up for you this way. My parents, strong believers. We were raised in a very denominational home. Now, we had in our family 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl. And as my dad would say, in that order. So there's 6 of us boys, and then she's the little baby, commonly referred to as the queen. Not that I'm bitter or anything. We grew up in this home, in South Daytona, a typical Florida ranch home, okay? And so fairly decent sized house, but 7 of us. So I grew up in a bedroom with 4 boys in one room. So when my girls come to me and say, hey, all of our friends have their own little room, why do we have to share a room, 2 of us? I said, well, you don't have it so bad. I grew up with 4. And so, but we had a room in this house. Now, if you walk through the front doors and go to your left, we had what they call a formal living room. And you can remember this, there was a pocket door. Remember the pocket doors, real popular pocket door? And that pocket door was always shut. And here's the reason why. My parents took the word formal to a whole nother level. This room had white carpet in it. This room had brand new furniture. And when I say brand new, I don't mean it was purchased in the last 6 months or something. I mean, it was just never used. You guys know the room I'm talking about? If you grew up in the 70s, you understand what I'm saying. And so, but we had this room, white carpet. And we had another big part of the house. We tear that room up. Nothing was off limits, really no limits besides my parents' room and this formal living. My parents are watching right now, so I'm going to give a confession to them. So you weren't allowed in that room. Now I grew up in the season where if you didn't listen to your dad, he let you know it, and he applied some pressure to your backside, and so we would. That concerned me, but one day I opened that pocket door. I had to know what was in there. And I sneak in there, and then there's this long coffee table. In the middle of that coffee table was a Bible. It was about that thick, about that big, gold leaves. And on the cover of that Bible was a picture of Jesus. And it had him with a circle on his chest, with his heart exposed, sort of coming out of his chest. And it's so funny because only what Americans do something like this. It's a white Jesus with blonde hair. He's not white, guys. He's Jewish, right? And so, but he's like this, heart coming out. He's gaunt, drawn in, and he's got his fingers like this. And I'm just gonna be honest, it kind of creeped me out. But that was our family Bible. Problem is, we never touched it or opened it. So snuck out of there. Now I know what's in there. I'm thinking the reason it's a vault is because of that book. Well, let me fast forward about 5-6 years. My parents get born again. It's during the Jesus movement. And church people were like I'm not saying all churches, but the one they went to was full of religious people. People that went to church out of obligation and guilt. But then all of a sudden someone introduced this. Hey, you don't get to heaven by going to church. You don't get to heaven by calling yourself a Christian, by identification. You get to heaven by surrendering your life to Christ. Listen, you're no more, hear me, you're no more a Christian by going to church than I am a car by sitting in my garage. It comes to a personal decision. And so they hadn't done that before. So they surrendered. They got born again. Here's the deal. This is during the Jesus movement in the 70s. God's sweeping through churches. People that are just denominational are getting saved. And so a whole group of their friends all got born again. Spirit-filled, the whole deal, guys. And so they're part of this church. The church said, hey, you guys can have your own little services, if you will, because the services that we went to, you didn't bring your Bible to. You're kind of weird if you brought a Bible to church then, you know. And so but what happened was this service got so big that they asked him, the church said, you're going to have to leave our church with all these people getting saved. We don't want them all getting saved, you know. And so this is true. And so my parents did something. They said, well, we have a house where you all could come and gather and have, and they didn't really have church services, but you know, like we all gather, and it was the charismatic deal. Everybody brought a guitar, and everyone brought a Bible, and whoever who had the message, it was just kind of different. And so I remember as a little guy, all of a sudden, all these people were coming over to our house on a Sunday. And guess where they met everybody? In that room. Wait, you can't meet in that room. And I remember as a little guy, they would bring food in that room. They would lay across the floor, drinks. They would sit in there and talk for hours. Come on, with their shoes on. And it blew me away. I remember a time we had a water baptism service. We had a pool in the backyard. People started getting water baptized. They came out of the water. They got kind of dried off, you know how it is, Florida dried off with the humidity, and you never dry off. And so they're coming in the house half wet. Guess where they went, everybody? To the room. And as a little guy, man, it's blowing my mind. Thinking, how do you do this? And here it is, guys. Why am I even telling you this story? My brother's here. He knows this story's true. And why am I even telling you this? Here's the reason why. Because we think, we've got it in our mind that if God's going to speak to me, I have to be perfect. I have to be holy. I have to have everything in order, and I have to be sterile almost. And what I'm trying to tell you is that room, when it was perfect, when it was clean, and it was sterile, God wasn't in there. It was just full of religion and junk. But when you let some dirt in, and when you let some hungry people in, and when you let some people who wanted more of God, God started speaking in that room. What I'm trying to get across to you, everybody, is you don't have to be perfect to hear the voice of God. God will speak to you. If someone would just say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening.